This is going to be exciting. Okay, I just shared it on my personal timeline just in case someone's trying to find it. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. We have Darla Sedlacek. Did I say that right? Excellent. This is Ha with Happy Strong You. Just doing some live chat and drinking some tea or coffee this morning or water, whatever you decide to have. Yes, I have mine here. So we have our loyal fan on here. Actually, Apoku, he did my free Zoom family BJJ fit class yesterday just to get some movement in. So appreciate that. So tell us a little bit about yourself, how you started jiu-jitsu. I know you had like 25 years of martial arts. So just introduce yourself and belt level, where you're at, and what do you do for a living?
Okay. So my first exposure to jiu-jitsu was actually the videotape versions of the Gracie Combatives back in like the mid 90s. So me and some friends of mine who at the time, I trained in Taekwondo for a long time when I was in college, and then, kind of dabbled in different things, but, started getting a little flavor of the jiu-jitsu way back. But never went to formal training about it. And then I was teaching self-defense workshops and trying to spread the word about the importance of learning forceful resistance techniques, especially for women. And that led to me doing my doctoral dissertation on effective assault prevention. So my interest in martial arts and my interest in self-defense, and especially for women and preventing assault, has been very intertwined for a long time. So I came away from formal training for a while for various reasons. And then about 7 or so years ago, I started getting the zest to I wanted to do formal training again and get hooked in with the school. So I was looking around. I went to a couple of seminars. I went to a Hoist Gracie seminar, and I went to a Steve Maxwell seminar, and I was looking for a school that I felt comfortable with. And word of mouth, friend of a friend, I heard of this guy that was opening up a school very close to me, and it turns out he was the brother of my neighbor. And I showed up day one, and Hurricane Jiu-Jitsu is now, my second home, basically. So John Lawrence is my teacher, and I've been training, since every day since the school opened. And I am currently a 3-stripe purple belt. My first year with jiu-jitsu, I trained twice a day, every day. And then kind of cut back just a little bit because it's a little much. And but I've trained, I have a rigorous training schedule. In the past, 3.5 years, I also have been teaching women's only classes at my location. It's a kind of a separate program with my instructor's blessing. We didn't at first we didn't have the time or the mat space to do more classes in the location where he was. He's since moved, but with his blessing, he said, "Yeah, go ahead. Have some women's classes, have women's program." So I've been doing that for 3.5 years, and then I also teach several of the kids' classes at Hurricane. And, I'll sub in for adult classes where needed, or, there was one class on the schedule where I was teaching that. So I absolutely love to teach. I love to teach as much as I love to train, because really I love to share jiu-jitsu. And I just, it's an absolute joy, and it's such a paradox because so many people experience so much pain from it. But, it's just, it's in me.
That's awesome. So what age did you start jiu-jitsu? I know you started Taekwondo earlier than that. So what age did you start Taekwondo, and age did you start jiu-jitsu?
So let's see, Taekwondo I started, I want to say I must have been 19. And I started jiu-jitsu at 43. That's
nice. Right. And that makes
I've been training for about almost 6.5 years, about that. Yeah.
So you're almost 50. Right?
In January. So I turned 49 in January.
40? Yeah. Okay. Wow. You don't look it. That's awesome.
Yeah, it surprises most people, especially because of the level of activity and my youthful glow. It's
definitely glowing through for sure. I wouldn't have. I was expecting.
I'm under the light.
Expecting younger. That's awesome. I love it. Definitely. Young, glow with a mature mindset for sure. So as far as talk about how'd you get into being a psychologist? What made you decide to go in that field?
So ever since high school, I knew I wanted to be a psychologist. I've been an athlete since forever. I started competitive skating when I was 7 years old. And for the time I was 7 until I was 16, I lived in the rink practicing, every day after school. On the weekends, we lived at the rink at all odd hours of the night through the day. And because of my experience with that, and because of some of the experiences I had with my coaches, which were not good at all, I had some terribly abusive coaches. And so when I think in high school, I had some exposure to psychology. I, had an awareness of psychologists, and I was like, and I knew that I wanted to be one. And because of my athletic experience, intense athletic experience, I started to think that I wanted to be a sports psychologist, which was kind of somewhat of a newer specialization in the field. So as I was going through my bachelor's, I talked to, a bunch of different advisors, and they didn't have a particular specialization, but I took every coaching course that I could. I took a lot of classes in the physical education and health department type stuff. So I kind of created my own little specialization. That was just in my bachelor's. Then when I started to do my master's work, I came back to the martial art because I had started martial arts during my bachelor's work. That's where, when I got to my post-grad work, my master's program, every single assignment, every paper, everything was related to like aspects of martial arts and assault prevention. So by the time I got to my PhD program, I already laid a really good foundation of a literature review in terms of what is really effective when we're trying to prevent assault. Because, I loved Taekwondo at the time. It was a very good platform for me to get into the martial arts. And it's very pretty, but it's not practical for self-defense. The way of the hands and feet, it comes from, as far as I understand, as far as I remember and understand, it was an art that developed to kick soldiers off of their horses. So, the big, whoosh, Van style kicks. It was to kick people off their horses in battle, so certainly times are different. And so jiu-jitsu is really far more practical, especially for women when, a lot of the assaults that we face are with inside of intimate relationships. Yes, stranger attacks happen, but, far more often it's, on the date or the coworker or the here or the there, and it's a surprise. So, so my doctoral dissertation, knowing that Taekwondo was pretty, but not necessarily effective, I started looking at, what do we need to know? What makes some kind of intervention effective? So I looked at a lot of that stuff, and as I said, my doctoral dissertation was, effective assault prevention. There was a whole bunch more words in the title, really long, but basically that was that. So, so when I got through that, I had my pre-doctoral internship was doing work with justice-involved youth. And then my postdoc, I was working for juvenile court. and I was doing psychological evaluations of any and all and everything you can imagine that comes to juvenile court. Domestic violence, a lot of kids that were charged with domestic violence but had been horribly abused their entire lives, and then they finally get to the point where they turn into a 15, 16-year-old and they decide they're going to fight back, and then the abusive parent calls the cops and charges them with domestic violence. So there were a lot of very heartbreaking but very eye-opening things that I learned from that line of work. And that led me to working with the Department of Justice Affairs for a while. And I was involved with a research project that was looking at best practices for nonviolent felony offenders with substance problems, which led me then to write a curriculum for coaches, getting back to the sports psychology stuff. So I took like a little wind in my road, but what works in terms of behavior change with people that have serious problems or involved with the justice system. It's very similar to what helps people change when they're athletes and they're on a football team and they're dealing with hazing or assault or bullying or drug, misuse and things like that. So everything I learned from working with the justice system, I applied to writing the curriculum for working with athletes and using coaches and their position of power to help, really look at the culture of sport and use that as a way to have athletes look wider at what they do and why, and how to have them engage in pro-social behaviors.
That's definitely an incredible path you just took us through. That's amazing. So I do have some questions off of what you just told me. You built the women's, and I know based off some of our interviews, we've had questions about this, but people who's built or trying to build a women's program, how do you go about approaching any ladies who's dealt with any domestic abuse or violence? How do you are able to bring them in to be able to do jiu-jitsu? What are some of the factors to help them to be able to manage to do the art and in a self-defense, and then also to overcome being able to find ways to survive or fight back? So I don't know if you can understand my question.
Yeah, for sure. It's a very interesting thing because I know, I read a lot of the posts on the Women's Grappling Network and a lot of the posts in other forums. And I know that there's a tension about women's programs or women's classes. I know a lot of women say, no way, I would never do a women's class. I don't want to be singled out. I want to be in with the guys. I can take care of myself. And from what I've seen, that includes women who have abusive histories or, perhaps an assault in their past, and, those who don't. So I think it'd be interesting to actually, collect some data and get an idea of, some real data on what is it about, what is attractive to women's programs based on various variables. I can only speak from my experience and, from that kind of stuff. So I know that some people are going to have a different experience. So I just want to preface anything I say with, I recognize people are going to have a different experience. And in the end, we just want to, me and a lot of other women and men, we just want to get more women on the mats. So for me, if a women's program is something that's going to get a woman on the mat who would not get on the mat at a regular co-ed school, then I'm all for it. I just want to get more women on the mats, because it's still true that at most schools there's, the one token female. And if you're lucky, you start to get a couple more trickle in. And then from what I understand, what I've seen from a lot of the forums is that it just takes a while. You get one or two women hooked in. And then if they're the ones that are going to all the classes, then, another one comes in and, they find each other and they have their own kind of sub system in the group, and they support each other. And eventually over time, more women start to come. And I think I've seen that at Hurricane, because for a while, when I first started, I talked a couple of my friends into going and training, and they were there for a little while. And then there were times when I was the only woman there, which didn't bother me. I was fine with that. And I think even when I first thought about doing the women's only thing, I had reservations about it because I very much enjoyed going to the regular co-ed classes. Even if I was the only female, I did not mind that. But what I was aware of and what became really important to me was that there are women that would not be comfortable with that and would not step on the mats. And with my mission of empowering women and getting them to find some self-defense and forceful resistance, I felt like it was my responsibility to test the hypothesis: would a women's program or women's classes be a good platform for that? So what I can say is that over the last 3.5 years, I've had a good number of women train. I've done like open houses. I think an open house can be very helpful. And let me come back to, so what makes it work? And I think it depends. So like for me, because I'm at my own location with it, I'm not at the school where I train. I'm considered a separate program. So there's privacy, number one. For some women, especially if they have a history of assault, and let's say they actively are having panic attacks and things like that, it can be they can feel embarrassed. So if at the outset they know that they're going to be a private location where the person who's running the course is also a woman, which I think can be important as more of us get higher rank in the jiu-jitsu world and we take more leadership roles, I think women's training, ultimately, it'd be nice if a woman leader was facilitating that. I'm not saying that, there can't be also male instructors involved in it, but I think it makes sense that a female leader is involved. And maybe that doesn't even depend on the rank. It would be nice if it was a higher rank, because obviously, we want the jiu-jitsu to be the main, part of it. The higher the rank, perhaps the better. But I think privacy can be important. Again, for those that have concerns, I know there are people that have some kind of history that don't care, but for the ones that do, who would be anxious but are interested, I think privacy can be important. So whether it's a separate training room or, putting up a barrier or whatever that may be, but having, separate space can be important. And I think it also is important to have the training times during prime time classes. Oftentimes the women's classes, from what I've seen, are always after, prime time is like 5, 6, 7 o'clock. And then 8, 9 o'clock hours, if the women's class is always at 9 p.m. and at those kinds of hours, it's harder because more often women are also, not that men are not, but women are often juggling the childcare and the this and the that and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not meaning to do a gender scripty stereotype there. For some women, that can be a struggle. If it's not, great, show up, time you can. But in terms of trying to get more women on the mats who wouldn't ordinarily get to us, I think that the scheduling thing can also be important. And again, I think in terms of people who do struggle with anxiety, PTSD, some kind of assault history, it has to be made explicit that who's running the show is sensitive to that. I know there are plenty of male instructors that are very good about that. Again, I read comments, I see the anecdotal, information about that a lot. Some are better than others, and that's true even for female instructors. Maybe some are better than others, but I think if you're trying to do a women-only program, women-only class, I think it makes sense to make it explicit. Like, yes, we are trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive. That doesn't mean that we're gonna, do therapy on the mats, because it's not. That's something very different. But it just means that if you do have a panic attack, we know how to help you with that without making it worse. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what are some of the things when someone has a panic attack, what are some of the things that you commonly do?
So it hasn't happened, too often. There've been, maybe a handful of people where that's been an issue. And I also know that there are some guys that, you know, struggle with anxiety and panic. Some of my male training partners at Hurricane, I know they also have anxiety issues, and I've talked to them about, you know, what to do and how, you know, how to handle that stuff. But I think it's always about knowing ahead of time before it happens. What are the steps? What can be done? Because once it's happening, yes, there can be intervention, but it's kind of like you have to have a plan ahead of time. So, you know, saying that, you know, we're sensitive here, and, you know, if somebody discloses that, yes, I have this history, and yes, I'm triggered, and sometimes I have panic attacks, then before we get on the mats, it makes sense to have a talk. And this is where being a psychologist is very helpful, because I have the skill to know, you know, how to manage that stuff or help facilitate, you know, how they can, you know, address it themselves. But it's, you know, ahead of time, like, okay, what will you want? Do you want someone to just stop and say, I'm here? We'll just pause. Like, your training partner can be supportive and just say, okay, we're just going to pause. Do you want to, you know, if it's happening, have your partner just notice and help you, like, you know, walk off the mat, and then you can take a moment in privacy in the waiting room or something? You know, it's kind of like having them come up with a plan ahead of time to know what to do when it's happening. When I've had a training partner who has started to have some panic, I just get soft, you know, like no matter what position. And a lot of times it's like when they're under side control or under mount. Obviously, those can be very triggering. Any of the jiu-jitsu positions can be triggering, but I think in particular mount and side mount are, you know, particularly hard. So when that happens, you know, I've had people that it's been very explicit where they're actually trying to work through this stuff, and we've agreed that, like, we'll even go there on with permission. You know, we'll go there on purpose, and then I'll pause and back off the pressure and have them start talking a new story inside. Like, instead of oh my god, you know, and maybe flashbacks, like, okay, I'm safe, I'm with Darla, we're just having fun, we're just playing around. And it's like a different narrative is created inside, so that it changes the physical response to the story that's happening.
Yeah.
And anxiety, and I'll say anxiety that is related to trauma is different than general anxiety, because it becomes so deeply lodged in the nervous system. So that's why a lot of cutting edge therapies, you know, psychological treatment therapies are involving movement. So there's a whole big thing. And as I mentioned, I'm also a yoga instructor. So there's a huge push in the yoga community to do therapeutic yoga, because issues live in the tissues. And, you know, there's all kinds of cliches about this. But truly, when you are using your body as another tool in your healing from whatever it may be, it makes sense, especially if, you know, you experience a trauma that was an infringement on your body. Obviously, it's your spiritual, mental, emotional space as well, but they're all connected. So sometimes when someone has been physically traumatized or otherwise, you can talk. The talk stuff is very effective. It's helpful. It's a necessary part. But for people that are, when their nervous system is put on the parking brake and they cannot get that parking brake off, sometimes it's intense activity that helps to start moving that brake around, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah, it definitely all makes sense. Before I'm going to break for a second, we have some people. Good morning. I want to say good morning to Jazzy. She jumps on. Poku, I will get through some of your comments. I want to jump on what you're just saying, because I was just thinking about this when I was taking a shower this morning. Sometimes a shower just helps me like get my thoughts through. But you're talking about the psyche of roles, because I started to do that whenever I roll with people. I read people's intentions and minds. If that makes sense, as far as, okay, their energy, they feel like
don't look in the eyes.
But you feel like they're tensing up. I was like, oh, let me kind of soften up. You talked about that. And so for me, in order for me to be a good, or, you know, however, good training partner, a good role partner is understanding what type of energy they're emitting and how to manage or manipulate those energy. Because I tend to read, that's my way of, and it also works in competition too, because you start to read into their mindset and how they react, energy. And so there's a flow in the subconscious to conscious mind as far as being intentional and unintentional is one way to think about it. But I tend to read people's energy as much as I can, whenever, by how they're grabbing, how they're like tensing up, how they're letting off, you know, and then I'll just kind of, you know, find ways to flow within that, if that makes sense.
For sure.
And so that's something that I think that awareness can help people, whether to train more or, you know, it could just like backfire. So depending on how much you push them and so forth.
Right.
Or,
and that, I don't mean to interrupt, but that's a really important point, because the body awareness can be, what's the right word? Like locked for people that have experienced trauma, because they'll dissociate. So they're no longer, they're just, you know, like the freeze kind of stuff, you know, like the arousal systems. I think, you know, we talked tiny little bit about this yesterday, but you know, there's the fight, flight, and then freeze. And then there's also another fawn kind of thing, but I don't want to get into that. But for a lot of people, you know, when they roll, it's fight, you know, like supercharged high arousal, which is not always beneficial. And we see that a lot, you know, maybe with newer practitioners, and, you know, and everybody talks about it, everybody knows, you know, it's like they label them as the spazzy white belts. I am not knocking white belts at all. I'm sure I was that way to some extent, maybe a little less, but you know, you know,
I call you a Sam.
You're learning to manage your arousal. So as you know more technique and you feel more confident and you know what you're doing, your energy, everything is energy. So your energy changes, and, you know, you know, it's very hard for a lot of people to flow roll, even at higher ranks, you know? So, managing your energy is a big deal. And that is, not only is it essential for, people that experience trauma, because their energy often is stuck in, you know, in their nervous system. It's either stuck on hyper arousal because they are constantly vigilant, looking for the next, who's going to hurt me, right? So there's the hyper arousal, and then for people that have experienced trauma, there's the low arousal, where they can't muster the energy. This is more like they will experience more maybe symptoms of depression, or just flat, just kind of, you know, again, more dissociated, like just meh. So you know, finding ways to engage people into jiu-jitsu, because jiu-jitsu, as awesome and fun and is the sport nature of it is starting to be recognized. There's been some research studies about this, that it is a valid tool for healing for people that have experienced trauma. Whether it's, you know, military people experiencing PTSD, whether it's people that have survived, you know, rape, physical abuse, you know, all the traumas, you know, where it impacts your nervous system. And some people, and some of the studies that I've seen, it suggested that coupling in the intense activity of jiu-jitsu to like dislodge the parking brake in the nervous system, but complementing it with yoga to then also, you know, calm it all down, because then you're learning about the edges of hyperarousal and low arousal, and you can then find yourself in the middle again, maybe more often. And that's part of the healing process.
Gotcha. Cool. Yes, Apoku says, I think men have the responsibility of being good training partners. It goes with everyone, but yes, for sure.
Yeah,
we
let
wanna
me speak to that. I think, like you said, we all have a responsibility to be good training partners, because I've seen on Women's Grappling Network and other forums, there are complaints sometimes about female training partners that aren't maybe so sensitive. So I think it's all of us. But obviously, there are more men training than women, so perhaps just by their numbers, they have more of the responsibility, because they're going to more often be the training partner of someone who has experienced something. And at the same time, I don't think people should be responsible for somebody else's trauma. You can be sensitive and you can be a good training partner in a general jiu-jitsu way. Be a good training partner. But if someone's having a panic attack and you don't know what to do about that, that's also not your responsibility. That should be the leadership's responsibility to step in and handle that and take care of it, because that's too much. It can be very much too much for a lot of people. People can have good intentions and they can want to help, but they can also not be helpful. And it may be beyond, like, I'm going to jiu-jitsu, I want to do my thing. I don't want to have to take care of people. Yeah. And beyond in a jiu-jitsu sense, you know what I mean? So I think the boundaries are extremely important. And that's another thing. People that experience trauma can, have some work to do in terms of establishing boundaries, which again is the beauty of jiu-jitsu. Yeah, tap is a boundary. If you're comfortable tapping, you're going to get hurt. You better set that boundary.
Yeah. Great point. Valid point. Excellent point. For sure. Alzaguer and Ribiera has excellent programs for women. They lead in that way for sure. And then you can see Mount being super heavy, especially when the gi covers the face on there. Yeah, on there. So let's transition a little bit. So talk about, I know some people are interested in maybe some like the competition mindset.
Yeah.
So the training mindset, whether it's from just training to translating into competition. So
something you said earlier is a really good segue.
Okay.
Now I'm forgetting. It was you mentioned the word flow, and like being in the right flow with your partner, like reading their energy, and especially like in a competition. You see people, and I say this a lot, and I do the same thing because I talk a lot with my hands and my body. But like, you'll see people on the side of the mats that they have to get super high arousal to get into their training mindset. So they're the ones, doing all the, and then there are other people that, super chill. They put the hood up, they got the headphones in, they're like not looking at anyone, not talking to anyone. And that's a different level of arousal. So managing energy for competition mindset, somewhat similar to some of the stuff we were talking about in terms of hyperarousal, low arousal. But now I'm not stuck in one of those places because of something in my nervous system. Now I have a little bit more control of where I can put my energy and manage my arousal up, down as I need it to. When you're able to do that, you get to a place that's the sweet spot. That's called the zone. That's called the place where you get peak performance and all optimal experience, and that is called flow. And there's been a lot of writing about this. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi was one of the originators of the positive psychology movement, which I don't want to digress on that, but positive psychology doesn't have to be positive all the time. We can also have neutral. I'll come back to that some of the time. That's too much of a digression. But so the flow, peak experience, optimal experience, all that for athletes is huge. Athletes, any high performers, whether it's musicians, surgeons, people in the military, intense performance, a lot riding on the line, if only in their minds. But certainly there are outcomes, especially from the military, that's life and death. In jiu-jitsu, people talk about their matches as life and death, but most often it's not life and death. Going into battle, you hear a lot of that kind of stuff when people talk about their competition matches. So even if in their own minds, there's a lot riding on it, not life and death, but there's a lot. So that pressure and the arousal that comes from that has to be managed in order to perform well. If you have too much arousal, you're gonna make mistakes. You might be angry. Like people think there's the mistaken idea that if you make yourself angry, you're gonna perform well. And it's not the case. At least it's not that simple. There may be some instances where that may be helpful, but I'll leave that aside for now. But for each individual, there is a zone of optimal functioning. And each individual has a place of arousal where they're going to be more able to plug into that flow state. So for some people, hood up, quiet, listening to classical music, that's where they're finding their door to get into the flow state. For other people, doing the punch, listening to super Metallica, heavy metal, whatever, that, pumps them up to their optimal level. Once you step on the mat and the lights are on and all 21 mats around you, if you're at Masters Worlds, the noise, the lights, the constant,
yes,
like constant noise. All that, if you're in the right level of arousal and you're plugging into your flow state, that all goes away.
Yeah.
It goes away.
Yeah.
And you step on that mat and you're not thinking, you're not overthinking, you're not worried, you're not in pain. So a lot of times, especially for jiu-jitsu people, we all joke, there's always something that hurts. We always got something. When you go to competition, part of the goal should be to go to that competition as injury-free as possible, because injuries and pain take you out of the flow state. So managing your arousal comes from breathing techniques. It comes from, maybe some practice and learning how to manage your energy, which again is breathing techniques, but there are things outside of that. It comes from learning how to manage your talk. So the constant chatter, learning how to manage that and direct it where you want to go. Helpful thoughts versus unhelpful thoughts. Perceiving the challenge as the right amount of challenge. If I go into a match thinking it's going to be boring, I am not going to do my best jiu-jitsu. I might win. I might even lose because I'm bored and I'm not paying attention and I miss something and I get subbed. But your best jiu-jitsu, like when you watch two people going at it, usually we see really awesome matches when the skill level is, for the most part, somewhere equal. And that's great because our tournaments are set up that way. We're supposed to be with people where, we're around about the same skill level and we're supposed to see the good jiu-jitsu happening. And guess what? That is a factor in being able to enter a flow state, is having the challenge be just right. Not too much, not too little. If it's too much challenge, if I'm going with someone who weighs 100 pounds more than me and is more skilled than me, I'm probably not going to be able to do my best jiu-jitsu. I can do jiu-jitsu. I can turn into a rock and have no edges for them to grab, and I can just endure the smash until the time is up. And that's jiu-jitsu, but it's not, in terms of competition, it's not sport in my best jiu-jitsu. I'm not going to be throwing all my favorite things around. I'm just protecting, which is okay. Yeah. That's valid. But in terms of competition, having the right amount of challenge is important. And that's why if you're training for competition, the bulk of your training partners should be like just a little bit higher level than you and at your level, and just a little lower than you, not too much in the margins. That's what's going to really help your game getting ready for competition.
Gotcha. We do have a question from Jazzy. How do you figure out your best state of arousal is for competition? Is it just a matter of trial and error?
To some extent, yes. And it's the practice. So if you can do some schools will have in-house tournaments, or they have particular competition classes. I know at Hurricane, my teacher will, especially if there's a tournament coming up and there's a lot of people from our school going, he'll carve out some of the competition class where he'll have what he'll call stress inoculation rounds, which is it's more like a simulation. So the class will be on the wall and he'll call 2 people out and they will have, say, like a 2-minute round. But it gives you the feel of, okay, woo, all eyes are on us and time is short, get it done. So depending on how one might perform during that, if they've never competed before and if they have no idea where to start, something like that could be helpful. So if you are like, whoa, you know, completely frozen, or you forget everything, you blank, like, what am I supposed to do? You know, then you know your arousal was too high. If you know, saunter out to the middle, shake and bump, and it's like, well, this is just my teammate, this doesn't mean anything. And, you know, you flop around and have a poor performance because maybe you weren't taking it seriously, then, you know, you need to ramp it up. So how do you find that optimal level? So some of it really is just trial and error. The more you compete, the more exposure you'll have to events that call you to intensity. Some people can find that in their training rooms. Some people can't. So they will use tournaments as a way to find that intensity. So the more, and you go in with a plan. So some of it is, there's the whole area of goal setting. So, you know, you could say, okay, I would like to fine tune my appropriate level of optimal functioning. Where am I best? So you could, and if you're gonna do it in practice, so again, and I'm just off the top of my head thinking of idea, I'm brainstorming here. So you could go to an open mat or, you know, a competition class and say, okay, I'm gonna try to be super chill and see what happens. So maybe you do like 3 minutes of meditation before the class starts, like instead of talking or whatever, you just like cool yourself down, breathe, close your eyes, maybe stay in the locker room if you think people, you know, you'll be too tempted to talk to people, whatever. But, you know, really try to bring your energy to the low spot with meditation, breathing techniques. You could do a few yoga postures. You could do like some yoga sun salutations, which would be a little bit higher in arousal land than just sitting and meditating. But prior to the class, you could adjust your energy low. Or if you want to play with high, you know, if there's a punching bag in the room, you could go over and like do some kicks and, you know, start, you know, up. Bunch of push-ups. You could use visualization. You could picture yourself being at a very high level competition. You know, imagery is very, very effective also in terms of how you adjust your energy. So, and I could speak at least an hour about that. So I'll leave it at that. But, you know, play with putting your, like, with breathing, with imagery, with movement, either low energy movement or maybe more high energy movement. You know, you could throw some weights around, you can do a bunch of kettlebell swings, but ramping up versus ramping down before you have a round, and see how you feel during that round. And there's a lot of things you can do during the round as well. But I think a lot of for competition, it's all about the pre-performance rituals. Like, what are you doing before you step on that mat in that ring? And what are you saying to yourself? What is your energy? Are you like able to look around? Are you like, I got this? And this is where like the self-talk is so important. Like having a mantra, a couple words, couple code words, where as soon as you like, oh God, oh God, oh my God, look at all these people, oh my God, what if I, you know, as soon as that starts happening, you stop, take a breath, and you anchor yourself to a couple words that bring your focus back to where you want it. Focus is another huge part of being in a flow state. And there are ways to be focused. Self-talk mantras, that's one of them. So
Excellent.
I hope I didn't. I don't mean to talk long.
No, you're good. So
I'm trying to actually give some ideas of okay, specifically what can I do? So
she likes the idea of the stress inoculation rounds, but I do want to talk to one specific thing that you're talking about. A lot of stuff I actually did right before I won PANS back in 2015. I've never won anything in my life. I was a bench warmer. I would freeze up. I was a great practice player, but a horrible game executor. But one of the things before I won PANS, I told myself, what is it that's I'm great in practice, but what is it that's keeping me from being able to perform? And so I was like, it's the mindset. So I had to figure out how to control that in a way. So what I did was, one, I sought out, and it was a referral, a sports hypnotist. And so I met with him. I wrote out specific words I want him to say. I mean, he helped me put in the zone, and I recorded our session. And so I kept that session. And every time, right before I practice, right before I go to the mats, I had a routine. So I would listen to that audio, like, maybe 2 hours before I have to go practice to get me in the zone. And then I had my pump up music and my calm music. And so right before on the mats, like on practice mats, I would listen to, like, if I feel like my heart's racing, I would listen to calm music. If I feel like I need to get my energy up, I will listen to pump up music. So I had that, trying to find that flow state you're talking about right before practice every time. So for a whole year, I would do that and practice that, and go in my training routine and figure out which positionals that I need to work on. Those focus while I'm doing that, and so that helped me to get into that mindset, that flow of figure out what between the surrender and the rage flow, if that makes sense. And so
totally, that's perfect. That's exactly, and it's as the viewer mentioned, that some of it's trial and error. And I can say from my experience too, like with tournaments and big tournaments.
Yeah, and competing tournaments helps a lot too.
I absolutely have my schedule events, my rituals that I do to prepare. And similar to you, I make I love music, and I make playlists all the time. So like for every tournament, I make a specific playlist.
Is there like a specific music, like one music that you would hear over and over again right before a fight? That's what I do. Yeah.
And what I do is, like, when I like an hour and a half before my mat time, I go down to the warm-up mats. And I'm talking about like bigger tournaments, smaller tournaments, you may not even have warm-up mats, and then you do something different. But when I know it's a big tournament where there are warm-up mats, an hour and a half before my mat time, I go down to the mats. I start my playlist, which is yoga. I have very soothing, calming yoga music. And I just, nice and easy, I start to do some yoga, I stretch, I just like super easy, just start moving a little bit. And then, maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, then I start pumping up the jams a little bit. And there's a little more beat, and I'm like, all right, it's time to start getting revved up just a little more, medium tempo. And then like right before, hopefully I have somebody that I can warm up with, where I do the movement drills. And then I always, if I can, I do live sparring before I ever hit that mat, because I know I need to dump some adrenaline. Yeah. So that's when I'm listening to, I'm like, get you, that. It's that, so that I am moving my energy from calm, because I don't want to get ramped up too soon. Then you dump your adrenaline, and then you can feel flat, and that's happened to me too. So I have played with this enough that I know my routine, and for the most part, I can get myself to that place of flow. There are times when I miss it maybe a little bit, and I don't feel like I did my best. But for the most part, in the last several big tournaments that I've been at, my formula is down. I know what to do and where to go inside to make my outsides do what I want them to do.
That's awesome. On that, I don't know if you ever watched the X-Men First Class, but there was a quote. It says, "It's the point between surrender and rage. It's Professor X teaching Magneto how to find and harness his pure strengths and powers from within to defeat the enemy." So I kept that quote because that was like an aha moment that just like clicked, because a lot of people, they don't know how to get to rage. when it's just something like, for me, I'm a person that doesn't like to get to rage. And so so finding that in between flow state.
And that's, I want to come back because something came up about that earlier about like anger. A lot of athletes, and this has been, I think, misrepresented, like in collegiate athletics. You know, a lot of coaches will say mean things to their athletes, thinking that if they make them mad, they're going to perform better. Well, I got to get them pissed off at me. They're gonna get me back, and I'm gonna show you, you know, that kind of thing. And it's more complicated than that. A lot of athletes absolutely do not perform well when they're angry. It causes them to be distracted. They make more mistakes. They commit more penalties. And typically, if you're angry, you're not in a flow state. Now, maybe for some people that have a hard time getting their energy up, maybe anger is a doorway that they can get their arousal up and then leave the anger and the rage at the door and just stay in that neutral high energy. But I think that's really hard. So anger, it's, you know, and you see it in UFC all the time. A lot of the angry,
I was about to say, there's a different, Conor McGregor would be one, trying to figure out his psyche. And then like another opposite person would be like Ryan Hall, a calm person in the UFC. So looking at those two people's psyches is just intriguing.
Sure.
I, you know, before I'm like, why is he acting that way? You know, but then I'm like, you know, you got to look past that and figure out how are they hyping themselves out to be able to fight, you know? Yeah. So, and I think you might have mentioned, I listened to one of your podcasts that you, like you can predict who's going to win that fight based off how they're reacting.
Totally. Yeah. I study, like I mentioned in that podcast, you know, it's like entertaining and fun for me to apply to sports psychology. So like I watch the Road to the UFC video, you know, vlogs, and, you know, based on how they're talking, based on how they're training and they're interacting with people, I usually can predict who's going to be the stronger contender. But it's all about the walkout song too, don't you know? Whoever wins the walkout song usually wins the match.
Love it. Yes. So make sure you got a good walkout song. You have some fans on here.
Hi.
So I know we have some people that are in, whether it's trauma, and I want to talk about it a little bit. I'm trying to get it in as much within the hour, is like overcoming, and we might have talked about it, but there are people that are struggling out there just trying to, whether it's within life or jiu-jitsu, overcoming anxiety, fears, doubts, depression, sickness. So how are people able to slowly overcome and get out of that? Because I know it's a matter of compassion would be one, in that finding that soft state, my take, and then finding ways to build their confidence and chipping away from anything that's holding them back. So what's your take on some of those things?
So compassion, most definitely. Having compassion for yourself, which you'd be surprised. Well, maybe you wouldn't. That's a hard thing for so many people, to be soft and have compassion for themselves.
Great point. Yes.
I think in general, so the how to build confidence, I would say, is all about having small measurable goals. Let me come back to that. The larger question, how to get through, overcome, find your way. If you're anxious, if you're depressed, if you have had trauma, if with everything. Even if you're just stressed more often than not, you're like, this, something's just not right. I'm not happy like I feel like I should be. If you have a question, if you're just not satisfied, and not that 100% of the time everyone's going to feel satisfied. We're human beings. That's just not possible. Happiness has been researched all over the world, and what it always comes back to is satisfaction. And satisfaction does not come from achievement. It doesn't come from you set the goal, you achieved it, now it's done. It comes from working towards things that are meaningful, working towards things that are important, that like that you feel deep in your bones, deep in your gut, deep in your core. So a lot of people have a hard time even figuring out, well, I don't even know what's important to me. I don't even know where to start. I feel lost. I thought these things were important, but I don't know. And I don't know. And I'm just stuck. So when that happens, often people will talk to their friends, they'll talk to their family, and friends and family are going to tell you things based on their experiences. And what I would like to really recommend to people is they not be afraid to find a therapist because, it is such a unique kind of relationship to be able to talk to somebody who knows, who has studied human behavior, who has studied these things, that knows from a scientific and experiential basis of what you can do to move through these things. And it's not that you have to be broken to go get therapy. Many athletes now are enlisting the services of sports psychologists because they want to be the best they can be. And I know there's a whole pressure about be your best that also can be defeating. But the idea is, in life in general, if you are struggling, it used to be in the olden days, people would go find the shaman in the village and they would talk about their stuff, and they might smoke over the fire, whatever. There were all the things that people would do in the village to help someone who is struggling. And now, I think there are still people around that are leaders in terms of how do you make changes in your life. And especially when those things might be more complicated because of trauma or because of anxiety, maybe because of attention deficit disorder. Maybe there's things that are on your plate you're not even aware of that are making it hard for you to make changes. So if you enlist someone to be a mentor for you, it will help you expedite the process. We all can get through the things. We will continue to get through the things with or without help. But when you get some help, you can get from point A to B, not only in a more smooth manner, but perhaps in a more expedited manner. I'm not saying that therapy is the miracle thing. It's not. It's therapy in combination with your movement practices, in combination with your meditation, in combination with your nutrition, in combination with the health of your relationships. All those things are extremely important. But part of the problem is that when people are struggling in all those areas, you need a leader in your life to throw the life preserver and pull you in and guide you back to the boat because you've drifted too far from where you need to be. So if you're struggling at all, find a therapist. And especially now, there's so many that are available for video sessions. You don't even have to go to somebody's office. You could stay in the privacy of your own home and maybe not feel as vulnerable. So get some assistance. It's a very unique and powerful relationship that helps you have a look at your life, where you've been, where you are, and where you want to go, and find the right fit. It's important to find somebody that you like and that you're going to get honest with, that can help you connect those dots and move forward. So if you're really stuck and you're struggling, that is a good way to go. If you're absolutely opposed to going to therapy, for sure, there are plenty of books you can read. A lot of people will say, well, jiu-jitsu is my therapy. Well, running is my therapy. They'll say those kinds of things. And to some extent, yeah, that is one modality where you can feel better and feel good. But if you're stuck in a relationship and you're on the brink of divorce, back and forth for months at a time, and are struggling, your jiu-jitsu probably is not going to help that. It might. You might get more confident. You might learn how to tap out of the relationship. Great, you're there. However, how much suffering in the meantime has there been because you're not addressing the relationship in the most effective, evidence-based, based on research kinds of ways. Yeah. So, there is a place for toughing it out and getting through it, and there's a place to call out and get some help. Have somebody in your corner. As jiu-jitsu people, we know when you have a competition match, if you don't have a coach in your corner, yeah, you can do it, but it's great when you have a coach in your corner giving you the play-by-play and giving you some suggestions. That's what a good therapist does.
Yeah, for sure. I would definitely agree. You'll definitely get to where you need a lot faster if you have somebody that has studied and practiced and experienced and has gone through it themselves. And so yeah, for sure, it's helped me a lot. I do want to, I do write a lot of stuff down. And then for what you're saying, as far as finding confidence, I want to read something real quick in my personal notes. I said a lot of people have insecurities. If you don't know how to deal with your own insecurities, you're not able to deal with others' insecurities. And so one way is I was reading, I heard to build confidence, it's, and you're talking about it doesn't come from outcome. So progress through process is what gives you confidence, not the outcome. The external and aesthetics are always moving. If you're rooted in those external things, they are not solid. You have all of these things, but you don't have confidence because you're attached to those things. You cannot attach confidence to the shifting, to the external aesthetics, accolades, and rewards. Reward yourself based on effort, not outcome. Life is about constant self-discovery of finding a new, better version of yourself, trial and error. So pick your battles. We don't know how much longer we have on earth. So that's something I just I write notes. And so I was like, you just made me thought about a note I just wrote. So
that's awesome.
On there. So let's end on that. We're going to dance out if that's cool with you, because I know you got some pretty cool vibe energy.
Can you do the Running Man? That's my favorite.
Oh yeah, let's go and do that. So let's try to do that. I'm going to turn this up, and we're going to you got space back there, so we can do the Running Man.
Then I drop the top, chick-a-ling gon' make it hot. Let's ride. Girl, I got it locked. Shut the club down when I hit the spot. Then I drop the top, chick-a-ling gon' make it hot. Let's ride. Girl, I got it locked. Shut the club down when I hit the spot. Baby, ever like what I see? I was throwing it, maybe. But that's the attitude, nigga, ruin it, lady. If it's all.
All right, we had somebody else, one person that tuned in for that one. Well, I appreciate you're awesome, Darla. I appreciate chatting with you. Hopefully we can maybe chat again.
I'm happy. If there's anything I can do to be of assistance to people in their journey in any way, I'm happy to do it. It's my mission. So
yeah, I might have to message you later about how a little bit more detail of how you started your women's program and the steps you took. So just curious about that. You started in a, someone else's facility. So that's a pretty cool thing to do on that. All right. Well, we're going to end on that. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Hopefully I'll share this out. And then I know it's been a little bit over an hour, so they'll need about an hour to kind of listen through this whole thing on there. So, all right. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Bye.
Bye.